The 1980s had many different bands and musical genres worth studying, but we're going to focus our attention on the music that best represented a decade known for American economic prosperity for the wealthy and the merging of Hollywood celebrity with American pop stardom. The biggest American albums of the 1980s represent the strategy of the music industry at the time. The industry tended to invest more money in fewer artists, releasing records with a string of hits. Michael Jackson's Thriller displayed the king of pop's excellent training in Motown. Jackson aimed to appeal to the widest audience possible, not just black listeners. As we'll see, Jackson would make the most of television media to promote his music. Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA also was full of hits. Though the album raised questions about the troubled state of working-class America a decade after the Vietnam War, Springsteen's songs were largely embraced as patriotic hymns to what's best about American culture. And Paul Simon, a darling of the 60s folk movement, released Graceland, a combination of early American rock and roll and South African musicians and rhythms. Graceland set the stage for what would become an increasingly popular genre called world music. One of the dominant trends of the 1980s was hair bands. Here we have Cinderella in the top left corner, Motley Crue in the top right corner, Guns N' Roses on the bottom left, and Bon Jovi on the bottom right. The hair bands developed out of the glam rock sensibilities of early punk, especially the New York Dolls. In the late 1970s, Kiss took this glam rock style to even further theatrical effect, and their success meant many other bands pursued a similar style. It is precisely the excessive quality of these bands, with their over-the-top guitar and drum solos, on-stage antics, and expensive recordings, that led to the more stripped-down, low-budget punk and alternative backlash of the 1990s. By far the most revolutionary event of the 1980s, especially for the music industry, was the birth of MTV in 1981. MTV's original programming consisted of music videos from English new wave bands who were popular on college radio and with adults in their late 20s. MTV's demographic is younger viewers now, and music videos are no longer the channel's bread and butter. Though many MTV videos featured the popular hair bands of the 1980s playing their songs on stage with very little story or visual interest, the best music videos explored what could be done with the visual media, and even broke new ground with video effects that would later go on to be familiar techniques in the advertising world. Perhaps it was MTV that American author Gore Vidal was talking about when he said, "Advertising is the only art form my country has created." Let's watch a few of the music videos that are the best of that art form. There were not too many African American performers featured on MTV before Michael Jackson showed the potential for turning just another music video into an event. With Thriller, Jackson offered an homage to the B-movie horror films he loved. As you watch, notice the way Michael Jackson draws on familiar themes of the 1950s American middle-class teenage experience, sung about in so many early rock songs. Driving in the car with his girl, Jackson begins to undergo a disturbing transition from an innocent young man into a werewolf. The transition is a clever way to express the hormone-driven changes undergone by adolescents during puberty. As the werewolf, Jackson plays the role of protector, though, in a scary world full of dancing zombies. 1985's Take on Me draws on a simple and familiar story, star-crossed lovers torn apart by the different worlds they inhabit, and uses an innovative technology to do it. The video brings a comic book world to life, and we see both live action and animation flowing together seamlessly. Notice all the barriers and mirror images, the way the action in one world is reflected in the other. Many of the best music videos tend to explore this theme of the merging of reality and fantasy, since that is what the music video offers the viewer. Another popular 1985 video takes a cynical view of the consumerism inherent in MTV's music videos. The song by Dire Straits is sung from the perspective of an average working man at a TV appliance store who looks at the beautiful people on the television sets and questions the economic system that rewards pop stars while the average working man continues to struggle to make a living. This video is one of the first commercial applications to use computer-generated animation. The brilliance of the video is in how the rudimentary boxiness of the computer-generated images refers to the boxiness of the television set. The characters appear to be made in the image of TV. It's a humorous video, making the seriousness of the critique more easy to swallow. Perhaps the greatest music video of all time is Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer. The song is an homage to rhythm and blues songs, so we shouldn't be surprised to see a lot of sexual innuendo. Gabriel's intent, though, is to explore the mystery of procreation, the two coming together in order to make more. There are many instances of objects entering orifices, holes, and coming out in greater numbers. Watch how the fish enters one ear and many fish come out the other. Of course, the most important hole to explore for a music video is the eye. The eye is the hole through which Peter Gabriel, the singer, is able to enter our consciousness with his video. In fact, the sledgehammer appears to be the ideal tool for Gabriel to break through the surface that keeps him from us, or him from his lover, or both. The entire video is framed by the sperm and the egg scene, and then at the end, following a gospel choir, Gabriel entering some kind of cosmic afterworld through a doorway. The gospel choir gives the end of the song a more holy context, a wink and a nod to the fact that Gabriel's meditation on the mystery of procreation is one of the big religious questions of mankind, and yet, this is just a music video. Pay attention to the television toward the end of the video. Is the TV a way to connect to other human beings, or is it a barrier that needs to be broken through with a sledgehammer? As a side note, the two young girls sitting on a stool toward the end are Gabriel's actual daughters, yet one more way to show that this exploration of procreation is a personal matter for the singer. MTV's influence on popular music was enormous. The marriage of music and image gave way to an increasing trend toward celebrity and the kinds of marketing strategies developed in Hollywood. The 1980s were also a time of looking back at the past and recontextualizing old ideas for a new generation. Along with an increasing image consciousness, we start to see musicians trying on different identities and referencing past figures in their art. Here are two 1980s stars that were quite successful at rebranding themselves, putting on recognizable personas to sell themselves. I'll give you a moment to try to figure out who they are as I explain a bit more about the 1980s pop music landscape. Appropriating different identities is common in American popular music. Bob Dylan most famously moved from one persona to the next throughout his career. But in the late 70s and early 80s, we see more referencing of past stars. Referencing the past is not just an interesting artistic move, it's also good business. The music industry tends to invest in strategies that have worked in the past, so revisiting the look or style of successful celebrities and pop stars of the past increased the chance of success in the 1980s. This trend has only expanded from the 1980s to today, which we'll see as we start to analyze some of today's most popular figures. Okay, now do you know who these people are? On the left, we have a high school photo of Prince Rogers Nelson, aka Prince, and on the right is Madonna Louise Ciccone, or Madonna. This is how we recognize them today. Prince is drawing on a wealth of past rock and pop stars, from Jimi Hendrix to Chuck Berry, who was one of the early rockers to use the guitar as a prop, and who also wrote songs in the hokum tradition, which are full of sexual innuendo and sexual jokes. And then there's James Brown in the hair, and here's an older James Brown in a miso soup commercial, showing where Prince's clothing style comes from. Of course, both James Brown and Prince owe a lot to Little Richard, who got many of his antics from Louis Jordan. Here's a later picture of Little Richard that looks an awful lot like the style Prince is now known for. So Prince's look is made up of a string of references going back all the way to 1950s rhythm and blues and early rock and roll. Here's a picture of Prince at the 2007 Super Bowl halftime show. The projected image of Prince as a giant silhouette with head and neck of guitar protruding from his midsection expresses Prince's excitement to be able to connect with so many people. The oversized crowd requires Prince to become oversized, so he draws on a hokum-type joke to communicate his love for the audience. Madonna also drew on female characters from the past in her art. Material Girl is not only a great example of Madonna's visual and musical abilities, but also represents the American economic landscape in the 1980s. In the video, a Marilyn Monroe-like Madonna is sought after by many men who throw expensive items at her to win her favor. But the guy who gets the girl offers something novel, the simple pleasure of a ride in an old rundown truck and fresh-picked flowers. Perhaps living in a material world where the material girl gets whatever she wants is boring after a while. Material Girl captures an aspect of 1980s America for the wealthy and middle class who benefited, at least for a time, from some of the economic policies of Ronald Reagan. Reagan became a symbol for the material world of the 1980s. He was an actor, so he knew how to market his ideas visually. Here's Reagan dressed as a cowboy for an election campaign. We know how effective this masculine myth has been in American pop culture and politics. Without having to say much, we are to assume Reagan is a strong, individual leader who will protect the people and vanquish the evildoers. Here's President Reagan outlining his economic plan in simple terms. It's called trickle-down economics. The idea is that as the rich get richer, the poor will be given more economic opportunities through the jobs created by the rich. A free market economy with very little regulation is the key to creating this wealth. Though the rich did get richer under Reagan, over time this policy has proven to create an increased gap between the rich and poor. Though trickle-down economics looked good on paper, the reality in the streets of urban neighborhoods around the country seemed to contradict that theory. The disconnect between the image presented to Americans and the reality was felt especially by working-class whites and urban blacks. Another example of this disconnect can be found in First Lady Nancy Reagan's Just Say No anti-drug campaign. The idea seemed simple enough, but the reality was quite different, especially considering the kind of world kids were living in. Here's a cartoon from 1995 that captures the irony of an older lady telling a young kid to say no to drugs, while in the background the kid is bombarded with advertising encouraging the use of substances to make him happy, cool, macho, etc. It's not a coincidence that this cartoon was produced in the mid-90s. As we'll see in our next presentation, the 90s is when rock musicians begin to focus on the ironies of what they experienced in the 80s. The disconnect between the happy images on television and the realities of growing up in broken homes or impoverished circumstances. The corporate world, supported by Reagan's policies, presented a tension that became unbearable, even ridiculous for many 90s kids. Here's an ad acknowledging the peer pressure kids face to do drugs. Then, in the last two paragraphs, a solution is offered. An IBM computer program that would help kids practice being faced with peer pressure scenarios so they could learn to resist. It's an ad supposedly helping kids learn to resist the persuasive voices that surround them. Now, isn't that ironic?